Welcome to the Virginia Education Center for Asphalt Technology. And this is the materials certification class for cold asphalt recycling for the field operations. My name is Trenton Clark and I'm with the Virginia Asphalt Association. Before we get started, I'd just like to reference you to this manual. This is the basic asphalt recycling manual that was developed by the Federal Highway Administration and the American Recycling and Reclamation Association. This book will serve as a guide for this class. A lot of the processes and procedures are outlined in this book. So as we go through the modules, we may be referring to this. But for the overall class, in your study guide, we'll have the material you need to be successful. So first, let's talk about the class while we're here. Well, let's look at the contract requirements in VDOT. So in 2020, VDOT added the field certification for cold asphalt recycling. So as we're doing cold in place recycling or as we're placing cold plant recycled material, we need to make sure that there's people that have gone through a class, understand the processes, understand the requirements, and are out there as responsible charges out on these projects. So to do though, we go through. If you look in your spec book, there's a whole list of different requirements, different technicians that'll be required. This table will be added or updated in the spec book through probably a special provision or a supplemental spec that will add the cold asphalt recycling field requirement. For a lot of our classes and a lot of our credentials, in the manual of instructions, we lay out what's the certification title, what school do they attend, and then if there's a proficiency requirement for the cold asphalt field certification, there is no proficiency associated with it, so it's much like the asphalt field level 2. Once you go through the class, you take the written exam. If you pass the exam, you'll become credentialed. So let's talk about the projects overall. Let's talk about communication. How do we communicate what is to be done on a job? Well, through that communication, we have various documents that are vital to the organization, and a lot of these are laid out in specs and contract plans and special provisions. All this goes together to make up the contract that you're going to be doing. So whether it's plans all the way to special provision copied note, these all tell the contractor what to build and the inspector what to inspect. So let's look a little bit more at the documents that may be part of your project. VDOT has a standard drawings. So if you go onto the VDOT website and you go looking, you can find standard drawings for almost anything, whether it's paving, putting in a curb and gutter, putting in a light pole. There's standard drawings that are to apply across the state. Then we have standard specifications. This is your spec book. So if we look back, here's our spec book for 2016. We have multiple years of spec books going back. Whatever the current year is, the spec book that we're following, those again, standard specs are to apply across the state, but they don't apply in every situation. We have supplemental specifications. What are they? Those are when we look at our standard specifications and note that there needs to be some changes made. Either we need to amend something or we need to delete. So they are covered in our supplemental specifications. Then we have our plan sheets. So some of our projects that are using these cold recycling processes may have plans associated with them, maybe on a construction job or a heavy maintenance job. But the plans will lay out how the project's to be built, cross sections, and they may override what you see in your standard drawings. They may also contain some notes that supersede your supplementals and your standard specs. So look and see if your project has plans and what's to be followed. Then we have special provisions. These are new specs. They're not contained in the spec book, but we look at them. They may tell us how something's to be built. We're going to be looking at special provisions later in this class associated with cold asphalt recycling and the field operations, whether it's cold in place or cold central plant. And then we have special provision copied notes. So with those copied notes, they may override something in a special provision. So So while this special provision for cold in place may exist, there may be something unique to that project or to that area where a copied note has been added that overrides the special provision. The thing to keep in mind is the copied notes are the highest level in this hierarchy. The standard drawings are the lowest. So as you look through your contract documents and you look through all this material, you need to make sure in your contract what exists. Special provision copied note supersedes, special provision supersedes all the way back. So make sure you understand how the project's to be built through all these. Well, sometimes there's some concerns, confusion, or some clarification needs to be made. And another type of communication beyond your contract documents is actually sitting down and meeting face to face. So we have pre-construction conference. So before a project begins, we get everybody in a room, we get all the VDOT players, the consultants that may be doing the inspection, the contractor, maybe some subcontractors, and lay out how the project's going to be built, answer any questions, get any clarification. Maybe there's some other ideas that the contractor may have to present. We lay it out in the pre-construction conference. Depending on the life of the project and the nature of the project, we may have formal meetings throughout this process. These could be laid out actually in the contract documents themselves, how often to meet. Throughout the whole time, we're going to have a lot of informal meetings out on the site, back in an office, over the phone. So we've got a lot of informal meetings and information sharing. The one thing I would recommend highly is written communication. So if a decision has been made, guidance has been given, make sure you document it and make sure everybody knows this is what was discussed, this is what was decided, am I correct? And then get everybody to agree that yes, this is the way we're going to move forward, because if it's a long duration project, personnel may change, the project complexity, new situations. You want to have something written that said, this is how we're going to handle this instance. So good best practices to actually write it down. Another thing with the communication is safety. We want to make sure all those that come to work go home the same way they came in. So we want to make sure everything's safe, because there's a lot of dangers on these construction projects. Projects with the cold asphalt recycling, whether it's cold in place or paving with the cold, central cold plant material, it's just like an asphalt paving job. We're either producing the material on site or we're hauling the material to the site. So a lot of times we're next to live traffic. We've got pavers involved. We've got rollers involved. We could have distributors involved. We've got traffic next to us. We've got dump trucks. Lots of things are going on, so there's a lot of dangers. So we need to make sure communication is there to keep everybody safe, that you're looking out not only for yourself, but for those around you. We want to make sure that there's good guidelines in place, how safety is going to be handled, who's responsible for it. Each company has developed, and they'll distribute very clear-cut safety policies. They want to make sure that everybody's on their project, whether they're an employee or a consultant or a VDOT or sometimes even public that shows up. We have a way to handle them, make sure everyone's safe. Everybody needs to know what they're doing, how to do it, perform it safely. They've been properly trained. Retraining, a lot of company policies will lay out how frequent retraining is done. A lot of these on safety, whether it's using personal protective equipment, maybe it's running the equipment itself. They're aware of OSHA guidelines, what's required, reporting. Safety talks could be weekly, could be done every day. It depends on the company and how they've set it up. And they want to make sure that if anything's noted, corrective actions are taken. Again, these are unique to each company. Overall, they're very much the same, but they want to make sure everybody's safe. So let's talk about cold asphalt recycling. What is it, and where should we be using it? Well, if we look in the Manual of Instructions, and that's what MOI stands for, Manual of Instruction, we look on page 85 of Chapter 6, Roman numeral 6, we see the definition of what cold asphalt recycling is. One, it could be the cold in place recycling train. So as you're going down the road, you're pulverizing the existing pavement to a specific depth, you're putting in a stabilizing agent, and you're paving it. So it's going back either directly into a paver, into a screed to be spread out, or it could be windrowed and then put into a paver itself. The second process is paving just like we would with hot mix asphalt, our conventional asphalt concrete, where we're taking a material that's produced at an off-site plant, or it even can be on the project site, but it's not right at where the work's being done. We're producing the material, and we're coming back and we're using conventional paving equipment and conventional compacting processes. So 2 different processes, both being done in the field. So let's look at cold in place. So as we look on page 85 in our manual, we'll see here's a good diagram. On the right, you can see the existing pavement. You can see that with the housing of that cold in place equipment, which is typically a type of modified milling machine. Here we're doing full width, that we're milling down to a depth. We're pulverizing, we're mixing in a stabilizing agent, which is either emulsified asphalt or foamed asphalt, and we can windrow it right behind the equipment. And then we also have the opportunity to now pick this up, put it in a paver, or some of the cold in place equipment actually has attached to it a paver screed to distribute the material, and we'll show some pictures. We're usually going down to a depth of 3 to 6 inches, so this isn't a replacement for a 2-inch mill and fill, nor is this a replacement for full depth reclamation, because we're working in a pretty narrow band of 3 to 6 inches in depth, where we're removing distressed material, stabilizing, and putting it back in place. This is what a cold central plant recycling facility may look like. There's different manufacturers. This is a working facility. Here you can see, here's a horizontal asphalt tank, a cement silo, but all the equipment is there in the back to produce the material. So the millings go in, they're screened, some moisture is added. In this one they add foamed asphalt binder, they mix it in a pug mill, and it's coming off a conveyor. Again, here we're doing 3 to 6 inch layer thicknesses. This is being treated like an asphalt-based material. It's not a surfacing material, and it can have multiple lifts be placed on top of it. But here we can be doing this as part of a pavement rehab. So we're milling the material, taking it away, we're bringing new material back. It can be one and the same, or on a stationary site where a contractor already has a milling pile, they can be producing the material coming right back, and the millings can go to the milling pile that could be used on this project or future projects. So where should we be using it? Well, it depends on the process. So what are we trying to do? Is this part of a new construction job where that CCPR can really be used on new construction, whether it's a road or a parking lot? Cold in place, we're doing it on an existing facility where we need some restorative or reconstruction, that we see the distresses in usually about the upper 6 inches of the pavement. So we may not have a sub-base issue, we may not have a subgrade issue, but all the distress is in the upper layers of the pavement. We're looking at 5 miles in length, again, because of the mobilization of this equipment to get it on site to do the work just from a cost effectiveness standpoint. And again, it's where we're doing a lot of patching. So we can see over time, we've got recurrent patching as necessary, and that really falls back into we're doing restorative maintenance or do reconstruction. With the CCPR process, that cold central plant, the stuff that we're bringing out of this drum or outside of this plant, we're producing this base material, basically any project size. So if a facility is already set up, we can be shipping it out to one to multiple sites. So various project sizes. We treat it like a base asphalt material. So we are going to cover it up. There will have asphalt placed on top of it. It could be surface treatment. It could be a thin lay. But at new construction, reconstruction, or major rehab. And in Virginia, we've done all 3. So we've used it in multiple scenarios to either part of a new construction or we're reconstructing an existing, or as part of a major rehabilitation. So this material is very, very flexible in terms of where we use it. Well, how do we know what we should be doing? Again, in the manual instructions, we look at the existing pavements, because again, we're trying to see what's the nature of the distress, how's it coming about. So we're looking at the visual condition, what type of cracking, rutting exists. We're doing structural testing, and here's a diagram of a falling weight deflectometer, but there's multiple ways to do structural testing. We're doing some coring and borings. We want to see how deep that distress is. You know, if it goes all the way through that entire pavement structure, these processes aren't really relevant. You know, we need to be looking at doing full depth reclamation if it's an existing road. So if we're on an existing pavement and we see distress is 10, 12 inches deep, then we need to be looking to do something different. And we're using ground penetrating radar, again, to really do an assessment of what's the condition of the overall bound pavement structure. So whether you're doing cold in place recycling or cold plant recycling, the final surface really depends on multiple things. It's generally one or more lifts of asphalt concrete. If you look in the manual instructions on page 88 of chapter 6, it gives you more details. On some low volume roads, that may be a surface treatment or a slurry surfacing. But as you get on interstates or roads that have higher traffic levels, the minimum asphalt thickness is 4 inches. So that can be either cold in place recycling, a cold plant recycling, CCPRM, or if we're even doing FDR, which is another cold recycling process, it requires 4 inches. So to summarize, as we get into this class, now this cold asphalt recycling field certification is now part of VDOT spec requirements. So if you're out on a job, either as the contractor that's doing the acceptance testing, overseeing the paving operations, or if you're the inspector, you need to be certified. Special provisions and special provision copied notes are going to be in your contracts, and they're the highest level of enforcement. So be aware of what those are. We start projects with a pre-construction, but we do lots of other informal meetings throughout the project. But make sure you document any decisions or direction made. Cold in place, we're doing roads that's got failures within 6 inches of the surface. So that's why we need to do some coring and borings to see where that failure actually exists, what's the cause of it. Cold plant, or the central cold plant recycle, the base material, so we can use it in multiple projects, either new construction, reconstruction, or part of rehab. And we can cover these with any of a number of our traditional materials, whether it's surface treatments, slurry surfacings, or asphalt concrete overlays. So I hope that gives you an overall feel of what the cold asphalt recycle process is on the field side. As we go through the rest of the modules, we'll get into the how they're performed as well as how they're accepted. If you have any questions, feel free to ask your moderator or your facilitator, and good luck.